Welcome back to Chaskin on Chain. Today we're diving into a coding tutorial and we're working with Sismo again. If you need a refresher on them, check out my previous video where I went over Sismo Connect in detail. In essence, Sismo Connect secures your Ethereum and Web2 social accounts in a vault, enabling ZK proofs to selectively disclose data without linking to your other accounts. This digital alchemy can be quickly incorporated into smart contracts or traditional Web2 databases. The project we're building today is called OnlyPenguins, an OnlyFans twist with top-tier user privacy. Privacy is a fundamental human right, and your subscription to OnlyPenguins is no one else's concern. The tech stack includes Prisma for ORM, MySQL/PlanetScale for databasing, and Next.js for both front-end and APIs. With Sismo Connect, users are assigned a unique Vault ID exclusive to this app, ensuring anonymity. Every subsequent app access requires reconfirmation of that Vault ID. In Part 2, we're offering discounts for Pudgy Penguin owners. To enjoy these savings, users must confirm both their Vault ID and their tally of Pudgy Penguins. For a fun twist, we're going to be impersonating two accounts in our vault, those of Jeebus's and of the analytics company Nansen, both big-time Pudgy Penguin fans. Let's dive in. To begin, we need to create a new Sismo Connect app. Head over to factory.sismo.io and click Sign In. Sign a message to prove that you own your Ethereum account. We are signing in with Ethereum. Click Create a new Sismo Connect app. Create Sismo Connect app. We're going to be calling it Only Penguins. I'm going to copy in this short description to save us time. Upload our logo, which is a cartoon penguin wearing a bikini. And the authorized domain, since we're just making a test demo, is localhost 3000. Then you're going to want to click Create App, but I already did this, so I'm just going to copy the app ID here. I'm currently in the boilerplate code. In order to get to where I am, you should head over to my repo, Chaskin on Chain, Sismo Offchain, Only Penguins. Click on Code, Git clone into my repository, and then after you do that, click on Commits and copy the commit hash for the 01 boilerplate hash, and that will bring you to where I'm at. This is a Next.js 13 project using TypeScript and Tailwind. The first thing you're going to want to do is run the command npm-i. These will install the packages you need to work with Next.js, as well as the packages from Prisma, which is going to be the ORM schema management we're using to talk to our database. The database we're using is from PlanetScale, and it is a MySQL database. So you're going to want to go to planetscale.com and create a new database. Once you do that, click Ready to connect to your database, and then you're going to want to create a .env file and select Prisma and then paste in the URL into here. Don't try to use mine because I will have the database erased by then. Next thing, let's run npm run dev so we can see what the boilerplate code looks like, and switch over to your browser and go to localhost 3000. You can see here it's just a very simple boilerplate website. It has our logo, which is just a penguin in a bikini, the heading, and then a short description of what we're going to build. There's two other things you should be aware of. The first one is that in the public folder there are now 5 pictures of penguins. The first 2 being penguins wearing clothes, the next 2 being naked penguins, and the last one being our logo. Also within the app directory, there's now this data.ts file. This file contains 2 arrays. Each array contains 2 objects containing the information about the penguins. The only difference is, in the data not paid array, the image is of clothed penguins, and in the data paid array, the image is of naked penguins. I'm back in the page.tsx, that's the component that's rendering our main page. Please feel free to pause and go over the styling in HTML that's rendering our boilerplate page, but it's just basic Tailwind CSS and HTML. This is a server component, and we need a client component in order to add the sign in with Sismo and the subscribe buttons. So let's put that component under H4 and call it Sismo. It doesn't exist yet, so VS Code is going to get mad at us. Within our app directory, do a new file and call it components/sismo.tsx in order to make a folder, and then within that folder, a sismo.tsx file. Then run rfce in order to make a basic component called Sismo. Go back to the page.tsx, erase the O, and then click the O again in order to use IntelliSense to get it to correctly import it in. Save that. Go back to your browser and make sure it says Sismo. Now let's go back to VS Code. Switching back to the sismo.tsx file, the first thing that we want to show underneath the headings is the two containers containing information about the penguins. These containers are going to be different depending on whether the user has paid or the user has not paid. So we need to keep track of whether the user has paid or has not paid in a state variable. We'll call it has paid and set has paid. Thank you, Copilot. But let's erase this React dot and import use state from React. So that being said, if we're using React hooks, this needs to be a client component like I mentioned before. We need to put use client at the top. Using our data.ts file here, we're going to be rendering two different containers for the two penguins, one being when the user is not paid and the second being when the user is paid. So we're going to need both of these arrays. Let's import those in. Data not paid and data paid. So that being said, let's go back here and conditionally render two containers of the penguins, one being whether the user is paid and the penguins will be naked, and then if the user is not paid, the penguins will be closed. So based on this data.ts, these two arrays containing the objects, we want to render them out on our screen. Whether the user has paid or has not paid, then if we want to conditionally render the two arrays. In order to do that, we need to, after the array, use the array method of .map, and each map takes in a penguin. And then for each penguin, we want to render a penguin component, which doesn't exist yet, but we're going to make that in a second. And these take in props containing all of the items inside of the object. But first it needs a key. So React is happy with us, and that's just a unique identifier. We'll go with name. And the name is the name, penguin.name. Description, penguin.description. Image, penguin.image. And lastly, age, penguin.age. And what we could do, since it's going to be the exact same for data not paid, is just everything after the name of the array. So starting with .map, let's just copy that on over. But it is still getting mad at us because this penguin component doesn't exist. So let's go quickly make that. And now I'm just going to copy over the final component. It's just a basic TypeScript component, so it takes in all the props, make sure they're type safe, and then it renders out a basic container containing the image on the left side, and then on the right side, the name, age, and description. Feel free to pause to go over the styling. In order to finish up this part, let's go over where it's getting mad at us at this penguin component. Erase the N and then type it again in order to use IntelliSense to get it to correctly import. Save it. And now let's head back to Chrome, and here we could see the two containers containing the penguins. Since the user is not paid, we can see that they are wearing clothes. This one has a cute little crop top. Okay, let's go back to our code. In order to work with Sismo, we need to install two packages. The first one is to work with Sismo in the front end. That's npm i@sismo-core/sismo-connect-react. And the second one is to work with Sismo in the back end. That's the same thing, except it's -server. In order to display the sign in with Sismo button, we need the Sismo Connect button component. So let's click that and import it from the React package. And this component takes in a bunch of props. I'm going to explain each one, don't you worry. The first one is called config. And this config is used to set up our app. So since it's used to set up our app, the first property that it takes in is the appId. Remember we made this earlier, so let's head to the browser, go to factory.sismo.io, click Create Sismo Connect App, find the app that we created, this only penguins, copy the appId, head back to VS Code, and paste in the appId. This takes in some more properties. If you click Control Space, you can see it also takes in a vault. This vault can be used to impersonate people, but we're not going to do that right now. And you can also display the raw response, so you can actually see the zero knowledge proof. That's just a massive bytes variable, but we don't need that right now. So underneath config, the next prop is called auth. What this does is on our backend, it allows us to access whether it's the Twitter account, GitHub account, Telegram account, or in our case, what we want is the vault ID. This actually takes in an array of objects, and the property is auth type is the key, and then the value is auth type dot vault, because we want that vault ID. We're going to import this auth type from the React component. Underneath this, we need a onResponse prop. What this does is after the user makes the ZK proof, what do you want to do with the proof? So what we want to do is have an async function that takes in the response being the ZK proof. It's of type Sismo Connect response, which we will import. And then now we're going to make an API request to our backend, which we haven't created yet. So in order to do that, it's going to have a response, and we are going to fetch to our backend URL, and that's going to be in /API/verify, because we want to verify that the ZK proof is correct. The method is going to be a post method. And the body is going to be a JSON stringified of our ZK proof. Before we go on to see how we're going to work with this response, let's actually make the backend API so it all makes sense. Since we're using Prisma as our ORM, we need to set up our schema. So let's go into the schema.prisma and think about the schema that we want to save in our database. We only need one table, and that's going to be a user. When working with Prisma, it's model user. We definitely need an ID, which is going to be the unique vault ID. That's a string, and the flag will be ID. Next, we need to save whether the user has paid or has not paid. That's going to be a Boolean, true or false, and default false, because when the user first signs in, they have not paid yet. They need to click subscribe in order to pay. Next, we will save created at as a date time and flag the default to now. And lastly, updated at as a date time and then flag at updated at. Now we need to run two commands to have the final setup in order to be good to go with our Prisma. And they are npx prisma generate. Whoops, we need to save this first. Now npx prisma generate, and lastly npx prisma db push. And our Prisma is all set up. Let's get working on the APIs. Let's head back to sismo.tsx and take a look at the API we're going to be calling. So we're going to have to build a route at /API/verify. This route needs a post method, and the body of it is going to take in the response, which is the ZK proof. So let's build it. In the app directory, click to make a new file, and we call it API/verify. And in Next.js 13, the routes are called route.ts. This route is going to be export async function post. It needs to be in all caps. It takes in a rec. This rec is of next request. And this is where we put the function that gets called when the post method gets called. We need to set up our Sismo Connect variable so that we can verify the proof. In order to do that, we have to import Sismo Connect from the server package. And out here, we have to set up the config so that it returns a function that we can call to verify the ZK proof. We do that by getting the Sismo Connect and calling that function, and it takes in a config, which takes in the app ID that we have in the front end. So we'll just copy that over to make sure that we don't make any typos. Now that we have this Sismo Connect variable, we can call it in our function down here. But first things first, we need to get the ZK proof. And we get that by making a variable for it. Sismo Connect response equals await rec.json. That's how you're able to get the body in next 13. Now let's set up a try catch because we're going to be working with our database, and we're also going to be making sure that there's no errors when verifying the ZK proof. But if there are any, we'll log out the error and we'll return next response, which we need to import in, .json error.message, and the status is 500 because there's some sort of server error. Now this is getting a type error because it's not sure if message is there or not. We'll just say any. Within the try, the first thing we need to do is verify the ZK proof. So we'll call this result of what comes back when it tries to verify it. And it's of type Sismo Connect verified result. Make sure you import from the server. And we are doing await Sismo Connect.verify, putting in the response. But it also needs to know what type it is, which will be important in a second when I explain it. This takes in an auths, just like before. So it's the same as here, auths. But the formatting is a little different here. It is an array of an object, and that object takes in a key of auth type, and the value is capital auth type dot vault. But make sure you import in this auth type from server. Remember, auth type vault, same as here, auth type vault. And what this allows us to do, since we made the auth type vault, it allows us to get the vault ID. So let's make a new variable for it. And we get that by calling this result that we just got back here and do .get user ID and make sure it knows that it's auth type .vault. We're going to use this vault ID to keep track of users in our database. The vault ID is a unique app-specific identifier. It's important to note that it's app-specific because you have a different vault ID for each Sismo Connect application that you use. That way, people that are using Sismo Connect on their backend can't come together and collude and find out who you are based on your vault ID. It's different for every app you use. So to go over the process of what we're about to do here is we're going to take the vault ID and we're going to search our database to see if a user with that user ID exists. If it does, then we're going to return that user and we're going to send back their vault ID, which we'll rename to user ID, and their paid status, whether that being true or false. If they don't exist, we're going to create a new one and then still send back that paid status as false and the vault ID. First, we need to make a new variable called user paid status and set it equal to false. Make sure you put let and not const because we might be changing it. If we look up user and the user exists, we need to switch the paid status to what we have in our database. So let's do that. We got to make sure that the vault ID returns something valid. If it didn't, we are going to have a response of incorrect. Return next response dot JSON invalid response and set the status to 400. But assuming it was a valid response, then we'll do const existing user equals await Prisma DB, import that in, dot user dot find first, where ID is vault ID. If this person exists, we want to take the paid status and update it to what we have in our database. If they don't, we will want to add them to the database. It's exactly that. So what we did here is prisma.user.create data and then made the data ID, the vault ID, and the paid false. Because they've not paid, they're a new user. Now outside of all of this if statement, we want to return next response dot JSON user ID as the vault ID, paid to user paid status, and status of 200. Save. And that's a wrap for the API. We're sending back to the front end the vault ID, renamed to user ID, and the user paid status, renamed to paid. So heading on back to the front end in sismo.tsx, once we hit our API route and get this res in return, we want to check to make sure its status is 200. But we do not want to set this has paid to true, because what we want to do is get those two variables, the user ID and paid, from res.json. And now we can set paid here. Since we have the user ID, and we know that the user has successfully signed in, we could set two new state variables. One being for the user ID, and the next being is signed in, to indicate that the user has successfully signed in. Let's set those here. Username, and then signed in to true. Now we can make this button dynamic. If the user is not signed in, we want to display the button so they can sign in. But if the user is signed in, we could show them their user ID. The user ID is similar to an Ethereum address, where it kind of just looks like random bytes, so we don't need to show them the entire thing. We're going to show them the first 4 characters, ... and then the last 2. Heading back to our local server really quickly, we see that there's still no button for the user to actually subscribe, so let's make that. Underneath this div, let's add a conditional. If they haven't paid, what we want to display is a button saying subscribe here. And let's add some attributes to this button. On click is going to call a function called subscribe, which we haven't made yet. Let's add some classes. To save us some time, I'm just going to copy these over. They're just very classic button classes. The only thing that you should be aware of is when the user is not signed in, there's some opacity to the button and the cursor is not allowed. But to really hammer this point home, we are going to say that it's disabled when the user is not signed in. But if the user has paid, we'll display a p tag, which says thank you for subscribing, and save that. Now onClick is getting mad at us because, let's erase this, this should not be there. There is no subscribe function. Thank you for making the boilerplate for us, GitHub Copilot. When the user clicks subscribe, they're going to be sending a simple Ethereum transaction, and the package that we're going to be using to send this transaction is Ethers. So let's install that package. Open up a new terminal and do npm i ethers. Now that's loaded. Within the subscribe function, let's make a try catch. If there's an error, log the error. First thing in the try, let's set loading states. So create a new state variable. And first things first, set loading to true. Then at the end, we're going to do a finally and set loading to false. And let's make the bottom a little more dynamic. So we're going to disable the button when it's loading. We're going to make this not say just subscribe, but make it dynamic. If it's loading, question mark, say in a p tag, loading ... or we will say that subscribe here. Save that. Now heading back up. After the set loading, when working with Ethers, the first thing you need to do is create a provider. You do that by new Ethers, which we need to import, dot browser provider, and you pass in window.ethereum. Now TypeScript's going to get mad at us. In order to get around that, you copy this and paste it at the top of your file. After we have the provider, we need the signer, but Copilot is hallucinating because we need to put await. Now we're going to be sending a transaction. So const tx equals await signer.send transaction. 2, we're going to put our address because we want users who access the application to send the money to us. So go to your MetaMask, sign in if you're not already, and copy your address. Paste it, and the value is going to be value ethers dot parse ether 0.1. To make it cleaner, actually, let's erase this and import the package. Now we need to wait for the transaction to be validated by doing await tx.wait. Now once the transaction is confirmed, that means the user is successfully paid. That means we need to make another call to our database and update our database for that specific user so their paid status is now true instead of it being false. In order to do that, we're going to hit a new API route that we haven't made yet. Await fetch. That API route is /API/paid. Method is patch because we're updating an existing user. Body is exactly that, but let's take away this. The JSON stringify of the user ID. Once we receive this, we're going to do that. We're going to make sure the res status is 200, and then we update on our front end paid to be true. So instead of showing the button, it will now show thank you for subscribing. Now let's make this API route in /API/paid that accepts a patch method. Back in our API folder, new file, paid/route.ts. We want to export async function patch rec of type next response. What this rec is the user ID that we get from doing await rec.json. Let's set up the try catch. If there is an error, log the error. And return an error on our end, status 500. Type any, so TypeScript doesn't get mad at us. Back within the try block, we now need to get the user from our database. So const user equals await Prisma DB. IntelliSense isn't working, so let's head over to our other route, copy the import statement, and paste it in here. Now that we have our db.user.find first, because we need to find the user with this user ID. So where ID is user ID. And now if no user comes back, we want to do exactly that. Return next response and have the JSON be user not found, status 404. Now that we have a user, we want to call the database again. That's exactly what we want to do. PrismaDB.user.update, where ID is the user ID and the data paid is now true. So we can return this to our front end. What we returned is a JSON of the user with the status 200. The status 200 is the important part because in the front end we check the res.status, make sure it's 200, and then set has paid to true. That's it. We finished part 1. Let's check out a demo of what we've built. Heading to our web browser, you can see here the sign in with Sismo button, as well as a subscribe here button, which has a little bit of opacity and doesn't allow us to click. Let's click sign in with Sismo, which is going to direct us to the page to generate the ZK proof. Quick timeout. How cool is it with just this few lines of code? We can make this whole redirect as well as the button in order to generate a ZK proof. You can see here we're connecting to our app, Only Penguins, with our stupid little bikini penguin there. The Vault ID, which I've talked about many times to prove ownership over our app-specific Vault ID number. And here you can look at your Sismo Vault, which has your addresses as well as your Web2 socials. Let's generate the ZK proof. Now we can see our Vault ID, which is labeled user ID here. And now we can subscribe. Let's click the subscribe button, and it shows up as loading and doesn't let us click again. We're sending 0.1 ETH, which is what we want. And let's confirm the transaction to subscribe in order to see these naked penguins. Keep an eye out for the penguins. Once the transaction is validated, you'll notice that they're going to change. And there we go. We can see the naked penguins with the heart and the wink. And now it says, thank you for subscribing. We've developed a privacy-centric mini app reminiscent of OnlyFans. However, this merely scratches the surface of Sismo Connect's capabilities. In Part 2, users will have the opportunity to save 0.001 ETH for every pudgy penguin they own, specifically in the account with the highest number of pengus. To make it more engaging, we'll even simulate the profiles of two of the biggest penguin collectors. Since now in the ZK proof, we also need to prove the amount of penguins that the user holds. Let's head back to the Sismo factory. Click on this little icon that'll bring us to the data group section. Search for Pudgy, it's already here. And see this Pudgy Penguin NFTs holders. That's exactly what we want. And copy the group ID. Moving back to the code. Let's scroll up and make it a variable. Const Pudgy Penguins group ID equals, and save that. Next, let's work on the Sismo Connect button. We need to add in a vault because we're going to edit the vault. Instead of being our vault with our addresses, we're actually going to be impersonating people. So the new vault has Nansen.eth of the analytics company, and also Jeebus, the Twitter micro celebrity, I guess. Would recommend following him, he's funny. Nansen, I have never used their analytics tools, but I've only heard good things. What's in common about them is they both are penguin supporters, so this will make it exciting. They both have at least 15 penguins. All right, moving on. Underneath us, now we need to add claims. This is where we work with that group ID that we imported above. Speaking of, the first thing it takes is the group ID, which we will set to that variable above. Next, claim type. This allows us to check, are we looking for greater than or equal to? Are we looking for less than? Are we looking for, you said it right here. What are you looking for? And what we're looking for is greater than or equal to. It defaults to equal to, but we want greater than or equal to because the user can choose, do they want to reveal 1? Do they want to reveal 10? But they have the option to reveal at least 1. So we'll let them know that the value is at least 1. Next is optional. Is true because this discount is optional. And lastly is selectable by user. We need to set this to true as well. This is important because we're not asking them to reveal a certain number. They have the option to reveal however many they want. Say they're the biggest pudgy penguin holder, they might not want to reveal all of their penguins because then, well, I'll obviously know that they're the biggest one, so I'll be able to go check who owns the most and be able to figure that out. But if they only reveal 10, there's probably a lot of people that hold 10, and their identity is more secret. Let's head on over to our local server and check out what this button looks like now. When we click in Sign In with Sismo, it redirects us again. And now we can see our vault is now these two people. Instead of our vault being here, storing all of our Ethereum addresses, we're impersonating Nansen and Jeebus. Also, this optional membership is new. We can check or uncheck it, and we can choose how many penguins we want to reveal. We can only reveal 10, or we can do all 19. You can see here it's greater than or equal to 1, and Pudgy Penguin NFT holders is what's hidden there. All right, cool. Let's head back. Now that our button is set up correctly, remember the next step is this onResponse. It calls our backend, which sends in our ZK proof as the body, and then we stored the user's information and some stuff in the backend, and then sent it back to our front end. But now there's one more thing that we need to store in the backend, the number of tokens they chose to reveal. Before we do any editing of the API, we have to change our schema to be ready to accept this. So let's add in tokens. It's going to be an int, yeah, exactly that, and default to 0. Save. But that annoys me, so let's adjust, now save. And now we have to run those two commands again, npx prisma generate and npx prisma db push. Now that we updated our schema, let's move on to working with the API. Oh, cool. There's actually one thing I forgot to mention that's really important. If we were to have just changed everything for the tokens and then tested out the app in the front end, it would fail. Because right here, when we do the Sismo Connect.Verify, it's not looking for the claims of the pudgy penguins. So it would fail because we would be presenting an incorrect ZK proof. So let's edit this Sismo Connect objects as well, so it's ready to check for pudgy penguins as well. The adjustments are the exact same as the front end. So I'm actually going to click this sismo.tsx and copy this on over. So I just changed the config to be exactly the same. And now I'm going to change this as well to be exactly the same. Copy the claims. And underneath auth, paste the claims. Just got to fix the formatting a little bit. But looks like we're missing this pudgy penguins group ID. So we need to copy that on over too. And we need to import this claim type. Make sure you click server. The next step is this result here that's returned after we verify the ZK proof. You can see here we use it to get the vault ID. Well, now we're also going to use it to get the amount of tokens that the user submitted. One thing to note though is since the ZK proof is optional, this claims might be empty. And if the claims is empty, that means we want to set the tokens to 0. So let's do that. We're going to first make an empty variable called tokens. And if result.claims.length equals 0, which means this claims here is empty. They did not submit a group ID trying to prove ownership of something. That means we can set tokens to 0. However, if it's not empty, then we want to set tokens to result.claims0.value because this is the first claim, it's the only claim in the claims array. Next, we also want to include tokens in our database to keep track of the amount of tokens that the user submitted. And lastly, we want to send it back to our front end. Quick refresher what's happening here. The user from the front end sends their ZK proof in order to sign in. And right here, the ZK proof is verified. No matter what, we're verifying the vault ID. But the users can optionally also verify the amount of pudgy penguins they have. Here we retrieve the vault ID. Using this, we retrieve the amount of tokens. If they didn't send in a claim in order to claim any pudgy penguins, it's set to 0. If not, we get it here. And then here we're adding the user to the database containing their ID, tokens, and their paid status. And then sending back to the front end is the ID, set as user ID, paid, and tokens. Heading back to the front end. And let's add tokens to the things that we're going to be receiving from the API. And let's set it in a new state variable. Not whatever that is. And make a new state variable. Thank you, Copilot. And now let's do something dynamic with the tokens. Since we know the number of tokens, right above the subscribe button, we can let the user know how much the subscription is going to cost them, since they might just be saving some money. But we only want to show this if the user is signed in. I just pasted this over to save us some time. What it says is, you have X token, so that's however much we just set in the state variable. So you have X pengus, saving you, and this says either 0 or tokens times 0.001 ETH. Your subscription now only costs you, and then this formula says either that same thing we just said here, or 0, in case they're not saving any ETH. We're almost done. Now we just need to change the price to make the price that's actually sent to us dynamic, because right now it is still set as 0.1. So heading back down, let's copy this formula because we are going to need it in a second. Head back up. After loading, we make a variable for the price. Set it to what we just copied. This way the price is the max of these two. So say they chose to reveal, I don't know, 1,000 penguins. No one owns that, but just let's pretend. Then instead of the price being negative, it's 0 because we do max. We want to change this value to be price to string, and that's it. Let's start the server back up if you closed it, and check out the demo. Just as a reminder, after this transaction goes through, and we call this API route to update whether the user is paid or is not paid, we don't need to change that if the user got a discount or the size of their discount. That doesn't matter. We're just updating from not paid to paid. All right, now let's check out the demo. Go to Chrome, give this a quick refresh, sign in with Sismo. Let's get the maximum discount possible, 19. We're sharing that we have 19 pengus from the account with the most pengus. We could see this new message here telling us we have 19 pengus, saving us this much ETH, and our subscription now costs this much. Click subscribe here. We can see that these numbers match. Click confirm. As always, keep an eye on the pengus. And there we go. We see them in their birthday suits, and we got our discounted subscription.